Okay. Okay, so here are the threats. Now, this is Campbell and Stanley. There's a threat of history. And what that is that something happens between, here they say the first and second measurements, right? So, you know, you measure for depression, you do a CBT intervention, you measure for depression a second time. Before you measure the second time and after you measure the first time, obviously CBT happens, but something else happens. Imagine they won the lottery, okay? Now they're no longer depressed. This is the threat. It's an internal validity threat, and it's called history. There are, and then this right here in the module, it says control. What that means is, how do you fix it? If you are concerned about a history threat, you fix it by making sure that the experimental and control groups are measured at the same time. Okay, that's a way. So if something happened to the group, it happens to them together, and that's a way that you can control that problem. Maturation. This is similar, but it means sort of like a natural change in time, a natural change. An example of this is like maybe a seasonal change. You're depressed in winter, but you're less depressed in summer, right? And it's not because you had CBT the whole time, it's just the weather got better. So maturation, or people get older, you know, or they're tired, right? So they score differently. Sometimes testing, there's a testing internal threat. What that is some agencies, with one of the legal cases I worked, was the case that the kid went on to die by suicide. Every time they saw him, they gave him a depression and a suicide screening. Well, at some point, he's going to get sick of it, and he's not going to really answer the questions honestly. He's going to be like, whatever, circle, circle, circle. I say I'm depressed. I don't say I'm depressed. You do nothing about it. So why am I answering these, right? So that is the threat of testing. If you over test people, you get poor results. Then we have instrumentation. That basically means your measurement tool isn't valid or it's not good. That's when people want to make up their own questions, right? You shouldn't make up your own questions. You should use a validated tool. That does not apply to qualitative people, though. It's a different situation. You have a different way of producing good questions. Statistical regression. This is a difficult concept, but it just basically means, like, okay, if you're studying people who have severe alcohol use disorder versus mild, you're picking a group because of the extreme issue. Well, if, you know, at some point you will observe differences because of those differences. But there's also one of the things where it says regress to the mean. What that means is, if you study too many people, like if you have 30,000 people, the results will regress to the mean, meaning everybody's going to be average. You're not going to really be able to understand the results of the study. They won't be revealed because they'll be covered up with these other things. Biases. So that means unequal groups, right? So an example could be, the experimental group is people with severe alcohol use disorder, and then the control group is people with mild alcohol use disorder. The groups are, there's a bias there, there's an imbalance, they're not equal. The control for that is randomization. If you randomize the participants, then the groups are balanced. Experimental mortality. So what that means is there is a difference in the groups because people dropped out of the experimental group. So let's say an example. Let's do substance use again. The experimental group is people are, you know, running every day, 5, 10, 15 miles. That's the experiment to try to get those people sober. The control group is people receiving massages. Okay. So then the experimental group people keep dropping out because nobody wants to run 15 miles, but the control group people stay in. That is experimental mortality. People drop out of the experiment because they're frustrated for some reason. And then that creates an unbalanced groups. It creates an unbalanced comparison groups. Then you can't really compare those groups anymore because now they're different. The last threat to internal validity is what's called selection, maturation, interaction. That would be when you put people in different groups based on their likelihood of getting better. So the example here is participants have a lower IQ, so you put them in the control group because you think they won't understand CBT. Okay. Now we have threats to external validity. Does anybody have any questions about the internal threats? Or threats to internal validity? Okay, external validity. Reactive or interaction effects of testing. Okay, so this is what you might know as the Hawthorne effect. When participants know they're being observed or measured, their behavior changes. Okay. And the idea, the way to control that is to add a control group, right? You can't just have the measurement group. Are you guys familiar with the Hawthorne effect, or do you want me to explain it? Hello?
Yeah, we talked about it in leadership.
This need to be refreshed for a second. It was because people were told to do something, because there was authority involved.
So what it was is there was a gentleman who was researching work behavior in a factory. He wanted to sort of increase productivity. Okay. So he came into the factory and, you know, was observing people taking notes. And what he discovered is their productivity went up simply because he was there. So he thought at first that he brightened the lights and he thought, oh, they're more productive. Let's brighten all the lights. But at some point they stopped being productive. And he kept doing things and realized it was really simply his presence that made the difference. And so that is the Hawthorne effect. When people know they're being observed, his name was Hawthorne, then they change their productivity, or they respond differently, but it's not based on the intervention. Okay. So you add a control group and then you can see if there was actually a change or not. Then there's interaction effects of selection bias. So this is similar to what we talked about before, but people who are more depressed were selected for the experimental group because they needed help. The way that you control that is you randomize the participants. People in the control group and the experimental group should be equal. There's reactive effects. So let's say people are in a DBT therapy group, but they have read every book that Marsha Linehan has written. They watch videos of it, so they know all about DBT before they get into the intervention. Then we can't really say that intervention made a difference because they already were exposed to these things before. The control for that is to eliminate extraneous variables. You could prevent participants by Googling. You can keep them in a controlled environment, but it is unrealistic for the type of research that we do. That's very challenging. Multiple treatment interference, that's prior treatment. So the last one was they have knowledge of the intervention. This is they've had prior treatment. This also will come into play when you are trying to, let's say if you're doing CBT for depression again, let's say that some of the people in the group started medication. That's an interference. So is it the medication that made those folks better or the CBT? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here. Stop the recording.